weren't treated equally by health professionals or emergency services, and over half said their care didn't reflect their culture, gender, or identities. We also heard that acute mental health units and emergency departments remain deeply unsafe for many mental health consumers. Of those admitted to acute units, 55% were not given a statement of their rights. 67%, so 2 in 3, were denied access to the non-legal advocacy they needed, like an official visitor. 13% of all respondents were chemically restrained without consent. 1 in 10 were physically restrained. Let's be clear, this isn't just poor practice, it is a violation of human rights. We also heard deeply concerning things about the failure of our healthcare system. First, choice is a myth for many. 61% of respondents said they didn't have access to a good choice of mental health supports. And it's not just about availability. 28%, or say 1 in 4, told us they agreed to care or treatment they wouldn't have chosen just to avoid the risk of coercion or forced treatment. Half of all respondents didn't get the support they needed to
put our heart on the line, and we're always, in everything that we do, we lead with our lived experiences. That's critical to what we do, and that's our job. But yes, certainly we can't do this alone. It is difficult sometimes because this is our hard work. We are pulled in different directions as well. But there are things that we have to manage, and as a team, we are very supportive of each other. As the leadership within the Commission as well is actually very supportive as well of what we do, and it's open to looking, where we can, where it fits in with our parameters, to different approaches to doing things as well.
Thank you. So what I hear there is I have a drink at the end of the session today. We're all mates here and we're all working to the same cause. Before I go to the next question, is there anything that we can do as a collective to help keep you safe in your roles? Because we all have our own stuff, and we heard from Mary around things like capital violence, and there is tension around government reform versus one-on-one engagement. Is there anything we can do as a collective to support you and support each other so that we all feel loved at the end of the day, even if we challenge each other?
So for me, it all comes down to being respectful. We all
awful challenges there, and that feels like one of the toughest challenges at the moment, to be honest. And there's no clear, and I guess collaboration and thinking and reflection are the things that we all collectively do together. So yeah, it's probably just a bit of a reflection for me on my own place in it and surety of what I am or am not doing and what you do in those moments. Yeah.
Linda, I'm going to suggest to you that if it feels messy, you must be doing a great job. I think that's something that we reflect on all the time, is often we're going first in these spaces, and often they feel messy, the structure's missing, and it can often just come back to who's not here, who we need, whose voices are in this room with us, and that's where that collaborative approaches can kick off. I've got a burning question that I just love in the app, and one that anyone might want to pick this up, is how can lived experience workforce members collaborate at a leadership level if the organisation doesn't have a lived experience leadership structure? For example, no senior lived experience workers or managers.
Time for people who experience severe distress. 85% are on welfare pensions. 80% are unemployed. 40% are homeless or in unstable housing. They are less likely to have children and keep them and die up to 25 years younger. That's excluding suicide, I understand, and are 20 times more likely to die by suicide. And really, terribly, they under compulsory treatment than we were in 1985. Statistics for First Nations people with experience of mental distress are alarmingly worse than for non-Indigenous people with mental distress. They have much higher rates of death by suicide, higher rates of compulsory treatment and restrictive interventions. They have worse experiences of mental health services, and they have poorer health and life outcomes than their non-Indigenous peers. The impacts go beyond the individual. Families, supporters and kin, who often lack support, also experience negative health and life impacts. They experience high levels of emotional distress and
into what we do as a designated lived experience team in the Commission. Before we start conversing, please note that Karen and I use interchangeable language. You may have noticed that here at the Commission, we have adopted the convention of using a hyphen when writing lived and living experience to signify the continuum of changing experiences people may have. When speaking, however, Karen and I will often simply say lived experience and will frequently refer to peers and consumers, families, kin, carers under the broad banner of people with lived experience. We understand that language is important. It is personal, contextual, contested and constantly evolving all at the same time. I am fluent in freestyle English, which means I also sometimes make up words and grammar as I go along, so please bear with me. I ask you to join me to reflect upon the lived experience movement and recognise ourselves and our peers as truly a collective seeking change. The vast majority of people experiencing mental health challenges, alcohol,
stronger guardrails around what we can and can't do, more credibility in the rooms. To Priscilla's points, we want to be in the rooms, but we will not be in rooms where we are tokenistic. We will be in rooms where we can make a difference. So it really is about our peak working alongside of the Alliance with the shared outcome on how together we get a system that is built for us. It's future-proofing us, and it's far less about paperwork, and it's more about the power and the presence collectively that we can bring together. So we've got this board. They're pretty cool people. A lot of them are our CEOs from our state member organisations. And we've also got the ability to have this beautiful national reach and leadership. So alongside of our board are lots of very clever people, skills-based people who bring specialist expertise. Now, they bring specialist expertise through the frame of the lens of family and kin, and that broader word that's sometimes misunderstood, carers of people. So this means that our decisions just are not technically sound, but they're grounded in humanly informed. It's the right blend of governance and advocacy at its heart.
Thank you, Karen. What we might do is I might go to Peter in the back corner first, just to make sure our online folks have got a chance to ask questions. First is Peter or somebody from Themhs.
Yep, I'm here. In the dark.
You can come out of the chat.
Yeah, we do have a question from online, and that is, if change takes time and occurs over the long term, what is the value in things being funded on a non-recurring basis?
Great question, and no, I would say that is something we would like to change. We've experienced firsthand, this is what we came into, and that this is the way money is allocated. It's one of those big, I guess, parameters that holds things in place.
and doesn't allow things to shift a bit the way things are funded. Certainly if I could change that instantly, I would change that too. I've seen just very recently really important supportive networks that people have worked really hard and brought everything into that, and very valuable, but without ongoing funding, I can't go on with.
Understanding that there's quite broad, big mainstream services, and I think it's, there's teething, there's things to work through, but I think we really are starting to see that understanding grow, and I think that's really important, and I think that IPS managers have looked at how do you provide an understanding to IPS for all the wellbeing of clinical workers of those principles is incredibly important in holding the understanding of what it is that's been offered. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to throw to a question from the app. So could you share how collaboration has improved supports and services for people living in rural, remote and very remote?
I mean, this is a Victorian perspective, so just to be clear, I don't think it's going to comment on the very remote. But I think certainly we've tried very hard we've collaborated actually a lot with neighbourhood houses, and I think if I think of our the family and carer-led centres, the Connect centres, I think about where
people didn't go into the hospitals, family members and community members, to have a social dance. And of course, in the late 50s, people started getting out of long-stay hospitals, and they still wanted the social dance, but they also wanted to have a job, somewhere to live, to stay connected with people and to learn things. And unsurprisingly, that's what we still do today. And so I'm very delighted to be leading an organisation that continues that legacy, and which is still reflected in the many things that we do individually and collectively across the sector in Aotearoa and Australia. And one of the things we've been doing in the last few years is thinking about recovery, and what does recovery mean, and what does being a recovery-orientated organisation? And I was at dinner last night with Sue, who will hear from shortly, and some other colleagues talking about stigma and...
Allegedly, I've got control of this slide, so let's have a go. Thank you very much, guys. The tech team have been brilliant, thank you. So I will say this till... I was going to say to my dying day, but that sounds a bit ironic, but I will, and I won't ever stop saying this, that mental health stigma and discrimination sit like that over all that we do in our sector and every sector beyond it. Really, if you care about recovery, if you care about suicide prevention, early intervention, mental health promotion, policies, services, levels of funding, political will, public attitudes, you have to do something around societal norms around mental health, which sadly are stigma and discrimination still. So just to move on, the Lancet Commission that's already been mentioned this morning, thank you Tammy, was published in 2022, and I'm just going to read a couple of points because we are short of time. But look at that point about the toxic impacts of stigma and discrimination, because stigma and discrimination are major barriers to us realising our human rights. And sometimes that can seem a bit opaque. What does that mean? Getting a job, having housing, having income, having education, having relationships, being involved in your community. There are basic human rights that are blocked by the impact of stigma and discrimination. The other thing is that stigma and discrimination for the vast majority of people in this global survey of people with experience, found the same in England as well, is worse or as bad than the symptoms of the mental health problem. And we are not just symptoms. We don't just go in and out of hospital. We want to live our lives, and we also want to be respected in care and treatment. So, it is way it's a much, much bigger issue than people just think. It's being called nasty names. It's an incredibly damaging part of our lives. And the other key finding, and I'll come on to that in a different slide, is that social contact, the interactions, two-way interactions that have to be meaningful, purposeful, a mutual exchange and a mutual goal, but they have to be safe and effective for both the person with lived experience, who is sharing their lived experience in a meaningful way, and for the audience member. So social contact, after this massive review of peer-reviewed journals, is the most evidence-based approach across all global contexts. It doesn't mean other approaches aren't evidence-based. We use a lot of social marketing. And for that to happen, you have to have a whole small army of talented people across a diverse range of communities with lived experience who are trained and supported to safely and effectively share our lived experience. It's obviously talking about human rights in that slide. And the other key recommendation and finding is that those of us with lived experience have to lead that change at all levels of change and organisations. Just skipping through, so one key thing from the Lancet is it articulated 4 different types of mental health stigma. So you've got self-stigma, public stigma, associated stigma, and I think you talked about that, didn't you? You know, to people working in the sector, like, why on earth do you not want to stay in the physical health sector? You know, and damning you and judging you, and you feeling less because of that, whereas you should feel more. And families and carers being affected, and structural stigma, which is sitting in policy practice and legal, the legal laws of the land. For example, in Kenya, if you develop a mental health problem, it's grounds for immediate divorce. In Ghana, you can't hold property any longer. I presume you're not deemed to be a responsible person. If you develop and are treated for a mental health problem, you lose all your rights to your property. And it's not just the global south, this is all over the world that we're talking about structural discrimination. So, rant over, time to change. What happened? I'm going to quickly whiz through this. All of the slides will be available. I'm here today and I'm here at some of tomorrow, so come and have a chat, please. I'm at 5% and fun. It was me. So I only have myself to blame. But we wouldn't have been able to do what we were able to do and finally get funding in England unless it was for Nokute Ow, like Minds, our brothers and sisters, and CB in Scotland. And that's why I'm so passionate, and many people here today are passionate about sharing learning across global regions. Similar challenges, different contexts, but sadly, something that's present in most of our communities. So, what did we do? Well, every 4 years, obviously we looked at the evaluation data. I used to interrogate it in front of and with funders, people with lived experience and partners. What was it telling us? Where were the shifts happening? Where were they not happening? Where were there opportunities? Where were there blocks? So every 4 years, we would go through this reinvention as we sought future funding. And we looked at the data every year, whether it was academic data at national levels of those outcomes, or whether they connect, and there's a multitudinal effect, like a composite effect. Oh, you're part of that. Oh, right, okay. And you're not doing it alone. Not that you would do it alone, but you're not the only person speaking out in your community. So we had 7,000, we were very privileged to have 7,000 people who came forward with lived experience to share their stories in their local communities, regionally and nationally. And social contact events happened all over the country. I could go on and on, so I won't. And then we funded 60 local hubs, so this was embedding this in local villages, towns, counties, so that it got embedded in local public health and mental health strategies. Local employers, local schools, local champions could work collectively, and it would sit in a more sustained way rather than just national. And we paid regional coordinators in every region. We had a children and young people's programme that took a whole school approach. Amazing young champions, they were absolutely brilliant. And Nikki was one of our young champions that you heard from in the film. Mental health in the workplace was just becoming a thing with the City Alliance for Mental Health in London. We launched Time to Change at the time of the previous major recession in the UK. Not the time we planned to run a behaviour change campaign, but we didn't have any choice, and actually it worked to our favour. So there were huge crashes with some of the big banks, and that got them interested, interestingly enough, through some terrible, horrific, awful tragedies of staff taking their lives. But that was, I mean, often, unfortunately, is that prompts people to get more involved. But there's a huge movement of mental health in the workplace. And we work with 3,000 pledged employers across every sector. I saw massive, great big chocolate rabbits when we did a pledge with Lindt Chocolate. I wasn't eating chocolate at the time, but the rest of the team engulfed a whole free bag. I sat in a tank when an army regiment got involved. We did a partnership with Ford Europe, who spent £500,000 adapting our male-focused ad, which I'll show you in a minute. So I sat in the back of a Ford Transit van, and all political parties pledged to Time to Change, and there you can see one political leader, and Gordon Brown was Prime Minister when we got the first funding from Time to Change. I'm going to get dragged off the stage. So then behaviour change, role modelling the behaviour change. The campaign evolved over time. We always did pre and post evaluation of every single burst, as well as the national levels of evaluation. Which channels worked, which creative worked, what with the call to action, how many people took that call to action. And the last two ads of the programme that I'm going to show you next. So after 6 years, we could see who was changing and who wasn't. We had African and Caribbean communities as our primary audiences, as well as the working age general population. And that's because African and Caribbean communities have such horrific experiences in mental health services. So we had an African and Caribbean working group as well as our lived experience one, and that was sort of embedded in all of our work. So we went for what we call the cold men. So, sorry, people that identify as male in the audience and online. What that meant was cold to the issue. So didn't think it was ever going to affect them, ever going to affect anybody they knew. Wouldn't engage in any campaign, would just be wallpaper to them. So we decided that we needed to work a bit harder. We spent another year in research, regional focus groups, and worked so hard, and then tested and tested and tested and tested and tested this, both with people with lived experience and our potential primary target audience. So I'm going to play you these two ads. The first one, I won't actually explain them, I'm just going to play them and hopefully get a chance. So, and then the second one I'm going to play you ran for the last 2 years of the programme before the government stopped funding it. See what you think of these. This is quite loud, but more of the kind of manual labourer rather than the A and Bs. So this is who we wanted to get to because we knew this was why our audience wasn't shifting.
Whoa! Can I help you? With John's mates. Is he around? Yeah, he's over there. Cheers, mate. Come on, John. Come on, boys. What's it there?
1 in 4 of us will fight mental health problems this year. You can do this, John. We're with you. Having a mate in your corner can make all the difference. So if your mate's acting differently, step in.
Here we go now, the bell's out.
So it's time to change.
So as well as the ads, you know, which went across social media, and I think did we play them in cinemas and catch-up TV on demand? This was the most effective media channel. That got something like 65% of the audience of the cold men taking that call to action. The next one had even better results. This is unparalleled in the commercial world of advertising and social marketing and in the NGO world. But the research that we did and the testing, so there's the Trojan horse. We weren't asking men to talk about mental health. This was a coaster that was what we call ambient media that went into cafes and pubs. And it says, is there a mate missing round this table? Reach out to him. So, and often there is. And that's where you want to get to people, where they are with your messaging as well as your provision. So this is, I'm just going to play this and then we need to wrap up. So this is called Ask Twice. I think it probably speaks for itself.
You all right, mate?
Yeah, I'm fine. Sometimes people say they're fine when they're not, but with 1 in 4 experiencing a mental health problem, to really find out, ask twice.
You sure you're all right?
Actually, I could do with some help.
Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, do you mind?
Don't you find that everywhere in the world? How are you? I'm fine. So, it's not a big thing to ask twice, and even more cold men took that call to action. A simple call to action. You've got to keep the call to action simple. So I've got a minute, so I won't talk about all of these slides, but this is the evidence base. It wasn't just us, obviously there was a whole movement, but we knew the difference, the people that were aware of our campaign, the difference of impact. Anyway, big shift in attitudes, societal shifts. Most importantly, that 15% reduction in reported discrimination from people with lived experience from using secondary mental health services. Very big improvements in media coverage. Improvements as well where people were time to change aware. They were higher on the likelihood to disclose to a GP, family member and at work. That matters as well. It wasn't one of our outcomes, but it mattered. That was our journey over time with attitudes. I'm sad to say that they've dropped back and the political will is not there in the UK, but there are plans to do something about that. These are the peer-reviewed journals. They're on my slides. They're also on my website if you want to catch some of these academic peer-review papers. One thing I didn't actually even realise for ages, and then somebody said, did you see that news that Time to Change was voted by the Royal Society for Public Health as one of the 20 public health achievements of the top 20 achievements of the 21st century in public health? I was like, how did I miss that? But I did. These are our core methods. We've talked about them. They've been adapted by partners and people with lived experience globally. So that's the British Virgin Islands, Ghana, Kenya. I've worked in Ukraine and currently working in Lithuania, India. Israel Gilau is the Lithuanian campaign. Look Deeper, it's called. And there's Kenya. And I just wanted to say one more thing, as well as a quick thank you. This was a newspaper headline on the 8th of June 1999, and Peter, you did a great sort of retrospective piece. We used to do Mind Bigot of the Year, as well as Book of the Year. Many, 30 years ago I first started working at Mind. And I'm just going to read you a quote. You can see that terrible cartoon, hopefully you can see it. So this was this terrible tabloid columnist called Richard Littlejohn. And he got the Bigot of the Year award. He wasn't just shortlisted, he actually got it. But I'll just read you this one. I was going to read you the whole thing, but if you want it, come and take a copy. I've kept it. It's very yellow, because it's 30 years old, this newspaper. But just to show you a tiny bit of where we have come from and where we are now. It's talking about people in Rampton Hospital, patients, and how they were having a disco. How dare they have a disco for patients? Let alone give out free condoms. Let alone, it also transpired that Rampton employed an African-Caribbean hairstylist, offered cut-price leg waxing, and was considering arranging a gay disco for homosexual offenders. And he says, he's basically saying he's not going to put another pound in Mind's collection pot. And it says, where it is, I have no intention of supporting any organisation which appropriates for political posturing and cheap publicity stunts public donations intended to help less fortunate. What ancient language. Having said that, I consider being accused of bigotry by a bunch of left-wing lunatics a badge of honour. Now, glad to say we wouldn't see that now. And all I can say is things have moved on. There's a film I was going to play, but we haven't got time. Here are some networks and resources that have been mentioned, so if you want the slides. And just a huge thank you for listening. Thank you to the Turble and Yagara people. Thank you to the sponsors of this conference. To all the young people in the video. Thank you to Themhs. Thank you for everything you do to make this change happen. Thank you to Lisa as well. And good luck with the rest of your conference. Thank you very much.
Of going through cancer and trying to start a family reminds us that mental health doesn't fit in a box. It's part of our messy, complicated lives, so thank you for that. And for those who are in the policy world, mental health in all policies, not just health policies, embedding lived experience strength through everything we do across society and dismantling prejudice and discrimination in every single part of the world. That's what we have to do, because that's what's going to change the world. Thank you very much. Go and have your lunch and catch up with Sir if you can. Right, morning team.
Good morning. And it has been a good morning session, and particularly and those pupils, particularly in the 1950s, these places. So this is Auckland. I googled Auckland and mental health, and these were the first 4 photographs. The headline behind the photographs, Auckland mental health patient cannot access fresh air and can be seen on the toilet. I kid you not. Auckland mental health facility, Seager House, is to close. Mother welcomes changes to care in wake of a tragedy. And the 4th one, COVID-19 is still up there. That's very relevant. South Auckland mental health and addiction services see surge in demand. These are the first 4 photographs that came up when I googled Trieste mental health. Very, very different in content. The headlines, BBC documentary, Trieste's mental health revolution. The next one was a public mental health model in Italy burns global. The next headline, 2 photographs, freedom is therapeutic. Who knew? In the United States, city and state leaders are calling for more involuntary treatment of people with serious mental illness. But one region in Italy has proven that another future of care is possible. So it's not just the pictures, but the narrative behind those pictures. They're very, very contrasting. And I guess since then, in the introduction of contracts that over the years have become more specific, directive, and figure. That ability to grow and change and innovate has kind of been lost somewhat. It's really, really tough to try and do that, to do something different. But we live in hope. I mean, the MBO sector is thriving still. It's still there. It's still a key player in our system. So, yeah.
I was going to add, I think it's hard to drive change and provide leadership, particularly if you're in the system. I think there's some great people with some great inspiration and innovation, etc. But I think, picking up your point earlier, I think if you think what Roberto says, it's about what they didn't allow in Trieste was a big system with small components, 4 centres, etc. And so it was easier to provide leadership. I think our leaders are captured by a massive health department, and I think we have such a risk-averse culture. But in actual fact, all of us here who have worked particularly in the health perspective, the ability to drive change versus just staying afloat every day and keeping the door open is a real challenge. And I think more and more we're going to struggle to see leaders do some of the stuff that Franco and others have done in 2025, because it's a very different system. We are captured by a huge bureaucracy and system, which is hard to change.
I think we start in this area of leadership by standing up for something that fires us up. And I'm so glad that we have the troublemaking option for these badges, and I've got many of them, because I think you can become a multiple troublemaker. John Lewis in the States would talk about how important it was to make good trouble. And I think we've made some good trouble over the years, and that's why we thought we were on a roll and didn't anticipate the So I think these are really important things to think about how we sustain leadership and how we work together in the long term to keep going when you start getting burdened by all the financial responsibilities of your success, and then thinking how you're going to make this last and how you're going to be able to hand this on to another generation.
We do have a few more questions, and I'll just ask maybe one or two of them. Try and keep us to time. The next one is, how do you see culture contribute to the success of Trieste? And what social movement is required to work towards the shifts necessary for similar changes to happen here in Australia and New Zealand? I mean, partly these questions are overlapping, but I don't know if there's any extra comments you'd like to make.
Of the culture of where it's being established and delivered, it's not reliant upon we need to have a Trieste or Italian culture to do this. It's connected to the culture where you're delivering those services, where you're developing those services.
And I think the culture gurus talk about how culture eats strategy for dinner, and that you've got to get your culture right and the mix right, and that means being inclusive of the elements in your culture as well. And I think that goes for your leadership group.
There are several more questions, but there's one which in Australia is probably a very big one, and that's probably not the last one that I should be asking here, but anyway, 2 minutes we have. Where do you see the NGO psychosocial support sector fitting into this model, partly decimated with the introduction of the NDIS? It still exists, providing evidence-based community support. So, psychosocial supports, NDIS, NGOs. Quick comments?
I think we could spend hours on this and still not put this one. I think again that's the architecture's different. If you think about Trieste, I'm going to take you back to the core of this. Trieste was a public sector model. And more recently in Trieste you've seen the development of the NGOs and the social enterprise, etc., complementing that. But they operate, picking up your point, Rob, they operate like an NGO in our sense, even though it's a public sector system. And so I think for us in Australia, we've got this different sectors doing different things. And as you say, when you had 1/3 of your investment in the NGO sector, you have a much better system. Now that it gets less because the public system or the hospital system sucks all the resources in, we have to think about how do you grow the psychosocial support sector. Now, some people will say, we're doing relatively well. Say for us in Queensland, we've got $1 billion invested in psychosocial support for people who've been a smaller group of people with bigger packages, but a lot more people are missing out and not getting much. So we've got some systemic issues to work out about how do we support people from a psychosocial perspective, and then try, why are we dividing the psychosocial and clinical support? Is that a challenge for us? In Trieste, it doesn't seem to be an issue.
Just to correct one little thing is that there was a burgeoning or a growing NGO sector coming up through the social cooperatives, and they became a de facto and then a real NGO sector because as they grew in size, but they're all under threat at the moment as they have to think about another way to face to address the government. And I think one of those ways is the family movement. Last time that there was a move by the Berlusconi very right-wing government to move back into to a hospital-based service, it was the family movement right around Italy that really raised those issues with government, and then it was dropped because it affected all parties.
I think one of the uncomfortable questions to provide some uncomfortable knowledge is also to ask ourselves, who does our system work best for? I mean, the system itself is not falling over, it's not necessarily fragile. It's going to continue, and we're not happy with it. So who is it serving?
Could I say also that coming back to some considerations that Ivan's been dealing with, is that on Thursday at 5 o'clock, 5 to 6:30, there is a session on this issue about how do you bring together players and the different forms of money, Commonwealth and state, and how do you make the grand deals that need to be made between them, and not just leave it as a financial deal, but think about the synergies that could be created if they could actually get together on one model and one strategy that combines different funding sources. So that would be the Themhs session on Thursday at 5 o'clock.
On that note, thank you, Ivan, Rob, Alan. Yeah. So thank you, everyone.